The biggest issues from our listening area and your questions answered. It's the KWLM Candidates Forum, live at the Kandiyohi County Fair, with the Wilmer Lakes Area Chamber of Commerce, the League of Women Voters, and KWLM.
All right, thank you. J.P. Cola here at the Kandiyohi County Fair at the Heritage Stage. And folks, if you want to stop on by, people are starting to filter into the fair. Sit down and give a listen to our candidates and hear their issues. We got the candidates for Senate District 17 here, and afterwards we'll have a Kandiyohi County Commissioners debate, or forum, shall we say. Right now, let's lead things off with Senator Lyle Coonan. We drew straws, so to speak, and he drew the short one. So let's lead things off with Senator Lyle Coonan.
Okay, thank you, JP. And I'll just do a quick introduction of myself. I graduated from high school at Maynard back in the days when Maynard had a high school. And then went to Wilmer Votech for 2 years back before the Minskew days, and took the 2 years of ag production from Wilmer Votech. And then farmed most of my life. I dairy and livestock crop farmed for 27 years in rural Maynard. And my wife and Sandy and I now live in Clara City. My oldest son lives in Montevideo and works construction. My second son, that's Joe, my second son Eric, lives in Montevideo and is a machinist there. My third son Levi lives in Montevideo and works construction. And my youngest son Isaac is in the National Guard and works in Montevideo and lives in Clara City. So that's a quick introduction of my family and I.
All right. Thank you, Lyle. And Andrew, or do you prefer Andrew or Andy?
Whatever you want to call me, JP, right. I'll respond to it.
Andrew Lang. Let's hear about Andrew.
Well, I am a lifelong resident of District 17. I grew up in Kandiyohi, Minnesota. My parents still live there today. I went to Wilmer High School. I graduated in 1997. I have gallivanted around the countryside in the military for the last few years, and now I am living in Olivia. We've been there about 10 years. I am married. My wife, Susie. I have two young sons, Elliot and Jonas, 9 and 5 years old. And I work for Renville County. JP talks to me offline every time he wants to know about the county parks down there. So, if there's any, that's it.
All right. Thank you, Andrew Lang. And by the way, the Anderson County Park is closed, by the way, due to flooding. All right, we did not have time to get to this particular question in our House forum, so I thought I'd lead off with this one, and Andrew, will put that out to you first. What are your views regarding mandated buffer strips between farmed fields and bodies of water? Andrew?
Well, my views on the buffer strips are I guess the first thing I'm going to have to say is I've talked to a lot of farmers on this certain topic, and the thing that keeps coming up is they were irritated or pretty upset with the way that it was approached. It was pushed towards using water quality as a identifier. This is why we're doing it in the name of water quality. So the things I would say is that the one size fits all that now has been fixed was a good move, and I appreciate that.
That's it? Okay.
No, I would like to say that I appreciate how farmers that have approached this and they've gone after it in such a way that they completely have followed along with the buffer strip bill, and they're going to follow along with it even though they don't agree with it. And I think that doing it in the name of water quality is a big issue that we need to look at. So.
All right, Andrew Lang. Now we'll ask Lyle the same question. Lyle, what are your views regarding mandated buffer strips between farmed fields and bodies of water?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that when the governor brought the idea forward back in, I guess it was early 2015, the Senate and the House both were looking at that as a pretty big decision to make, and we thought that input from farmers and other people too have interest in water quality, that they should be time for input and on how to design the program. So both the House and Senate went into the session with the approach that we wouldn't do anything, take the interim to get all the input, and then put something together that was workable for the 2016 session. Well, what happened then was the governor put a lot of pressure on at the end of session. He wanted the buffer strips, and so he was using his power and authority as a governor and got it into the environmental bill, and so the bill passed. What I don't like about it is there wasn't input from people who are affected by this and who have interest in this, and I really think that was wrong. What happened was the bill passed, and then during the interim we got all the input anyway, and then when we came into the 2016 session we tried to make some fixes, and I thought there was some pretty good fixes there. Like, for example, one thing was to extend the time to implement the buffers. I don't think that all of that work can get done in a short amount of time that's allowed, but the governor wasn't interested in that, so we ended up not getting that fixed. But there were some other issues in the bill that were corrected, and I think it's a better bill now.
All right, thank you, Lyle. Next question, 2016 legislative session ended without a tax bill, bonding bill, or transportation bill being passed. Now, discussions about a special session. In fact, I think there's going to be a meeting today to try to get that back on track. What needs to be done to get these bills passed, or are they necessary? Lyle?
Well, the tax bill is a fairly easy one because there was pretty much agreement on that when we got to the end of session. The governor pocket vetoed that bill, and part of the reason was that there was an error in there. It was an and an or mix up, and that amounted to $100 million, believe it or not. But we could have fixed that, I think, even without the bill being vetoed. But anyway, the tax bill, I think, is fairly simple. We'll get that passed. The one that gets a little tougher is the bonding bill, which includes transportation projects. And the main hang up there was Southwest Light Rail. And the way I seen it, the House couldn't pass the bill with that project in it, and the Senate couldn't pass it without the project in it. And so what happened at the end of session is that we amended the bill. The bill did pass off the Senate floor with a supermajority, bipartisan support, and then the clock ran out. So now, since then, the governor has added some other items that he would like to see in the bill, and they're kind of expensive. But through the negotiations here in the last few weeks, he's backed off on a lot of that, so we're a lot closer now. I'm hoping we can get there. The latest proposal I seen was at Southwest Light Rail, the state share of that to get the federal matching money would be raised within Hennepin County by the Hennepin County Rail Authority. That way there'd be no state money in it, and I'm hoping that can get some traction. But again, that's probably the sticking point to getting the bill accomplished. But I do think we can make it one way or another.
All right. Thank you, Lyle. Now, Andrew Lang, 2016 legislative session ended without a tax bill, bonding bill, or transportation bill being passed. Now there are discussions about a special session. What needs to be done to get these bills passed, or are they necessary?
Well, I think they are necessary, and I would say that if we do go to a special session, especially when it comes to the tax bill, I would say that it does need to be passed as the way it was stated prior, with the student loan tax credits, with the farmer 40% tax levy and referendum cut. I think those are important issues, and I think they're important issues for local people like myself. And I believe that the transportation bill is another big issue that, West Central Minnesota's roads and bridges they're in disrepair. There's no doubt. And I think it's one thing where if you go to a special session, you have to go with the intent of passing what was put on the table at the end of the regular session, and it needs to be continued and pushed through. Now, when it comes to Southwest Light Rail, I don't know why that was such. I know the bill passed the House with 89% bipartisan support. It was an unquestionable amount of crossing the aisle, per se. Now, the thing is, when we go to the special session, if it doesn't happen and win, I don't believe that the Southwest Light should be part of that. And I think we should step away from that and go into the bonding, the tax, and the transportation bill strictly.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Next question. What do you think needs to be done to end the gridlock at the Capitol? And we'll lead things off with Andrew Lang.
Well, gridlock is, I would say there's plenty of gridlock, and I would say the first thing we need to do is start trusting each other. And I would say that the Senate and the legislators right now, I don't think they do trust each other, and for good reason. When you pass a bill out of the House with that 89% bipartisan support, like I was just talking about, and you send it to the end of the Senate at the end of the session with the expectation that it's going to pass. Now, amendment for Southwest Light Rail gets put in, and it does not pass. So the rest of the state, including District 17 residents and municipalities and throughout that are going to be missing out on the transportation funding, I believe that that's a big issue, and that's step number one is trust. And if you can't talk to the counterparts across the aisle, you're going to have other issues as well. So,
all right. Lyle, same question. What do you think needs to be done to end gridlock at the Capitol?
Well, let me say, first of all, that gridlock in St. Paul is not very serious compared to gridlock in Washington, D.C. But having said that, there still is, some disagreement, of course. Most of the bills that are come to the floor in both House and Senate pass with bipartisan support, and that's something that a lot of people don't know. The media likes to concentrate on the stuff we don't agree on, and it makes for more exciting news reporting, I suppose. But take, for example, this past session, the spending bill was agreed on by a Republican-controlled House, a DFL-controlled Senate, and was signed by the governor. The tax bill was agreement with everybody on that, House, Senate, and the governor, except for correcting the mistakes and including the tax exemption for the school league, which there's no debate about either. And so that won't be a problem. And with the bonding bill, most of that was agreed on. I would say if you look at the value of the bill, 95% of that was agreed on. It's just the Southwest Light Rail was the only sticking point, which unfortunately stopped the whole bill. But even on Southwest Light Rail, I think we can come to an agreement. It's interesting that the bill passed with bipartisan support in both the House and in the Senate. It's just that the two bodies didn't have an agreement on Southwest Light Rail. But again, I think we can get there, that it's not that, we're not that far away from an agreement on that.
All right, thank you, Lyle. Next question, we'll lead off with Lyle. Describe your position on health care and MNsure. What changes, if any, need to be made? Lyle?
Well, it's pretty clear that MNsure needs a lot of fixing. And that I fully support. To do away with it and go back to the system we had before, that's not going to happen, and I wouldn't agree with that anyway. The way the system was run before, it was crushing under its own weight, so we had to do something. Now, with MNsure, there's a couple of issues there. One of them is the technology issue, and that's slowly getting fixed. I think it's unfortunate that we had such a short window of time to set that whole system up. You'd never see that done in a private sector in that short a time, because the system's way too complicated to get up and going in the short amount of time the state had to set that up. But that's the technology, and they're working on it, and I think we can get that fixed. Now, for the rest of MNsure, there are definitely issues. And of course, one of them is the cost of health care, especially with the individual insurance plans. And that's not just a MNsure issue, however. That's a health care overall issue, because Blue Cross Blue Shield dropped out of both MNsure and the open market. And so it's not just a MNsure issue. But there are some things we can do, I think, like get some waivers to allow more people to use MNsure, move the eligibility up to 275% of the poverty rate, and also I believe the commissioner should apply for a waiver to allow the tax credits and cost sharing to be allowed there also.
All right, thank you, Lyle. Andrew Lang, same question. Describe your position on health care and MNsure, and what changes, if any, need to be made.
I'm going to have to completely disagree with the fact that MNsure needs to be fixed. I think MNsure needs to go away. I think MNsure is a failed experiment. We've spent $300 million on it trying to get it working. It's not working. It's not working for close friends of mine that have lost their insurance or shortly will. As far as the federal exchange, I'm not a huge fan of going on it, but I think that's a good next step. I know that I've talked to a lot of people door to door, and what they're always saying, that's one of their big main concerns, is healthcare. It's become so expensive. I can't afford it. I know for myself personally, I can't afford the MNsure program. It's as much as my mortgage payment. The deductibles are outrageous. I can't afford it. There's no way it can go with it. If we have to go to the federal program, that's a good next step. Certainly some other options are small group plans that, some Cenex co-ops have looked at, some of the farmers unions have looked at as an option to try to get away from this MNsure program and try to get away from the regulations and the burdens that it provides. So that's kind of my stance on that.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question, what is your position on party needs versus district and constituent needs? And if possible, be specific and include examples. Andrew?
Well, For me, I came into this race saying to the Republican Party right away that if I don't agree with what you're going to say, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to vote with the Republican Party. I stand on my own 2 feet, and I believe what I believe, and I am going to use my beliefs in that fashion. Specific examples where I would think that, at least in our area in District 17, daycare has been a big issue. Now, it hasn't been talked about lately, but I think it's a great example of how we didn't listen to constituency. I've talked to daycare providers again and again and again. The first thing I say is, how could you possibly be thinking about unionizing us? We're a private, self-employed person. And I think that's a great example of how we just didn't listen to what our constituents and our small business owners within our community were saying. We weren't listening to them. We were going to try to push this unionization down their throats, and that's the way it was going to be. Another good example is the Southwest Light Rail. It keeps getting pushed. Lyle was talking about it now. And it's a party issue. It doesn't mean anything to us out here. It doesn't help us out. It kills our transportation bill on the end of the session because of Southwest Light Rail, and I really have an issue with that.
Thank you, Andrew. And now, Lyle, same question. What is your position on party needs versus district and constituent needs? And be specific and include some examples.
Okay, good. Thank you for that question. I like to do my job in governing, in my party in governing, with what I call the 3 C's, and that's conscience, constituents, and caucus of course, being the party. And I like to make those considerations in that order. And conscience is that, I see legislators take votes that don't line up with their conscience, and they burn out, and they just don't last. So that's kind of something you have to consider just to exist there. And then the next thing is constituents. What do your constituents want? That's the next most important thing. And for myself, since I grew up here, my conscience lines up pretty well with what my constituents are thinking. So I really don't have much problem with those two. And then the last one, of course, is caucus or party. And I just think that should be last. The parties, and I can kind of see where they're coming from, but don't necessarily agree with it. Each party seems to think it's the final answer for everybody in Minnesota, and just not because they're political parties, but just because Minnesota is so diverse, there can't be a single answer for the whole state of Minnesota. The state's way too diverse, both in its landscape and the population, and so the parties have a role, but they shouldn't be the primary driver in what's happening. But if they conduct themselves properly, they do have a role, I think.
All right, thank you. Lyle, you're listening to Forums at the Fair on News Talk 1340 and 96.3 FM KWLM. I'm J.P. Cola with Senator Lyle Coonan and Challenger Andrew Lang. And Lyle, you get the next question. Some cities and local governments are working on setting minimum wages for both private and public employers. Is this something that you'd support?
Well, let me make it clear right up front. What I support is one minimum wage across the whole country, and that needs to be done in Washington. Of course, in Washington, things just aren't happening these days, but that's what I think needs to happen, is one uniform minimum wage across the entire country. Now, to get to more specifically the question, and what we're talking about here in Minnesota is Minnesota has a minimum wage set, and Minneapolis, for example, now is considering a higher minimum wage than Minnesota has. And let me say that Minneapolis, according to law, has the right to do that. But it makes me a little nervous in that, is it fair? Is it fair to employers in and outside of Minneapolis, or is it fair to employees inside or outside of Minneapolis? So again, I'd like to make it real clear. I would support a minimum wage across the whole country.
Thank you, Lyle. And now, Andrew, same question. Some cities and local governments are working on setting minimum wages for both private and public employers. Is this something that you'd support?
No, I do not. I actually agree with Lyle on this, and I would say that I do support a nationwide minimum wage. And part of the reason is I try to look at it from a standpoint of a small employer, one that lives in the city of Willmar and one that lives, say, in the city of New London. Whether it's a small business construction company or it's a lawn mowing business. If you look at, obviously the the businesses in Wilmer would probably have an advantage when it came to hiring people because they're paying that $15 an hour. When it comes to New London, they probably doesn't have such a great job hiring people, but they're going to have an easy job bidding jobs because they're going to have an easier time making those ends meet. So yeah, it just I'm all for local control. I appreciate the fact that Wilmer or any small municipality has that ability to control themselves locally and push down the road like that. But when it comes to minimum wage, I would say the same. As a federal minimum wage is a way to go. Level playing field for everybody, at least give them the opportunity for a level playing field.
All right. Well, we're getting down near the bottom of the hour, so let's go right to concluding comments. You both have a minute each, but if you go a little bit over, life will continue. But final comments, Andrew Lang.
Well, I would just like to say thanks for the opportunity to come up here and give you my opinions on some of these topics, and I really appreciate that opportunity, the League of William Motors and JP and KWLM as a whole. I would like to say, I've always hesitated to talk about my military service. I think the two should be separate. I think that this political venture that I've started on doesn't necessarily have to do with the military, and I've been pressed to do so, and I think part of it is the things I've learned in the military, the leadership, the integrity, the honesty, all that stuff turns into me. That is me. That's what I've learned. That's who I've become. That's what I'm going to bring to St. Paul. That honesty, that integrity, that drive to do what I think is right. And I appreciate this time. Thanks, JP.
Andrew, are you still in the Guards?
Yep, I am an active drilling member of the Minnesota Army National Guard, and I've had 15 years in September I've been in. And I spent a lot of time with a different suit on.
Okay. Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, Andrew Lang. And now, concluding comments from Senator Lyle Coonan. Lyle?
All right, thank you, JP. And Andrew, I would like to thank you for your service also.
You're welcome.
I think that's great
Thank you.
We have men and women that are willing to do that. It's good. I would like to thank the Women League of Voters, the Wilmer area Lakes Area Chamber of Commerce and Lakeland Broadcasting for sponsoring this forum. Also, I think things like this are good to inform the voting public on the issues before the election. And just a couple of quick priorities that I have as a legislator. The first one, of course, is we have to balance the budget in St. Paul, and we're required to do that by law. But I agree with that. That law is a good law. The next thing is, I think Minnesota's most important asset is its people, and so we need to invest in people, education, healthcare, continuing education, workforce development, all of those things, and finally, of course, infrastructure. We need to be investing in infrastructure. But thank you.
All right, thank you, Lyle. And you said Levi, your son, is in the Guards?
Yeah.
All right, well, we thank him for his... Isaac, okay, well, thank you. All right, that'll do it for our Senate District 17 forum. Forums at the Fair here on News Talk 1340 and 96.3 FM, KWLM. We have one more to go, and that would be for 2nd District Kandiyohi County Commissioner Doug Reese and Steve Amon. They'll be coming up in about 5 minutes or so stay tuned or come on out to the Fair and see us live. But right now, back to the main studio.